Shalom, welcome to the Jewish View. My name is Rabbi Nachman Simon with the Chabad House of Delmar, and together with my co-host Mark Ronich, who's been covering the capital for over 30 years.
And I've been having a lot of fun doing it, and I've met a lot of legislators along the way, and one of our guests here is someone who I've become very good friends with, is Assemblyman David Weprin. We knew, I really like the fact you were a U Albany alumni, but welcome back to the Jewish View.
Thank you, Mark. Always a pleasure to be here, and always a pleasure to be with you, Rabbi.
And I've been around so long, I even knew your father when he was the Assembly Speaker.
It's been so long, he's trying to know his grandfather over here, Mark.
And your brother Mark tells me that he was running around in the Assembly chamber while your father was Speaker.
Right, but he actually is also an Albany, SUNY Albany alum as well.
Yeah, he tells me I can now publicly say that he was the U Albany mascot. He was in that outfit.
Really?
Yeah,
Really?
he just didn't want anyone to know
You
that.
have to spend so much money to go to college to be a mascot over here. But you know, David, Dad, you're probably one of the biggest advocates of the Jewish community, Jewish members of the Assembly, and of course you care about all the people, I know that. But on the other hand, there have been a few things you've been an advocate for the Jewish community, and one of them is the kosher halal food. Why don't you tell us about that?
Absolutely. It's a problem in the Muslim community, but it's becoming an increasing problem in the Orthodox Jewish community too, because although most Orthodox Jews send their kids to yeshivas, there's a large Bukharian Jewish population who are observant, but generally send their kids to the public school and have religious training out of school. And every time I go to speak in one of my schools that has a Bukharian population, there are always a lot of yarmulkes in the audience, and they're mostly the Bukharian Jewish children, and they have a problem because they have a free lunch program in the schools, and they have trouble. They can bring their own lunch, but then they feel they're not getting a hot meal, and they don't have that kosher option available. So I think it'd be very important to the Bukharian Jewish community.
And I think someone had said to me, well, what are they going to do, have a mishkiach on set? But it's the airline food.
It would be prepackaged meals, but at least it's a hot alternative, and it shouldn't be a costly thing, and it should be on request of any student.
Now, last year you had a Senate sponsor. Do you have a Senate sponsor this year? I think Senator Tony Avella rather, I think he dropped it.
Yeah, I'm not sure. If we don't have a Senate sponsor, we'll get one.
All right, because I looked it up, I didn't see one, but that doesn't mean it's not there, so I just wasn't sure if...
Well, we got a lot of bills we're negotiating between now and the end of session, so sometimes these things come together at the last minute.
Okay, well, hopefully this will too. Is the city supporting this, or are they opposing it?
Well, I'm not sure they're opposing it. Certainly if we don't require like a separate kitchen, and we do say it's upon request, I think it's manageable, it's reasonable. I think it's something that we can, get the city to go along with.
Yeah, Dov Heiken had said to me that, he says, I wouldn't oppose it, but it's not one of my top priorities. I mean, that's, he says, I can't oppose it, because,
right.
So is he someone, are you getting that type of lukewarm support?
Well, a lot of people in the Orthodox Jewish community figure most of the kids go to yeshivas, but increasingly more, and especially, as I mentioned, in the Bukharian Jewish community, which we have a large community
Where do they live?
in Queens.
In Queens?
They live in my area, Jamaica States,
Andrew Hevesy has a big
Forest Hills, yes.
Forest Hills.
They're all over Queens now.
So, but they don't send their kids to private schools? They specifically want public schools? I don't know.
Most of them, a lot of them send their kids to public schools, and then they have, religious training
afterwards,
school.
like I had. Okay, like a Talmud Torah thing, yeah.
Another second idea would be the religious attire. It should be non-discriminatory. So tell us about
and that's
that.
A bill you
I have a bill that's passed the last 3 or 4 years in the Assembly. Unfortunately, hasn't passed yet in the Senate. Tony Avella actually has that bill in the Senate. It would prohibit discrimination in all employment in New York State, whether it be public or private employment, based on religious attire or facial hair for religious reasons. And of course, we know Hasidic Jews more Haredi Jews could often have long beards, like the rabbi over here, and they shouldn't be discriminated not only in hiring but promotion as well. And it's also actually an important bill to the Muslim community because of Muslim women are often discriminated with hijabs in employment, and Sikhs who are of Indian descent, who wear beards and turbans, and they're often not hired or not promoted because of their beards and turbans. So I don't think anyone in this day and age should have to choose between observing their religion the way they see fit and supporting their families and their employment.
And, I'll tell you that this seems so strange that it has to be legislated, that it's just not common sense as a societal norm, that, really has to be legislated.
Well, there was a situation of a Sikh operator of a train who was actually a hero during 9/11, which prompted this. He was actually born a Roman Catholic, Irish Catholic, Kevin Harrington. He converted to Sikhism many years ago. He has a long beard and turban, and he was actually an operator of the train at the front of the train, the motorman at the front for many years, and no one complained. He had a beard and a turban, and then all of a sudden, after 9/11, people complained that there was a terrorist driving the train, and the MTA removed him from his position as operating the train. And ironically, he was actually a hero during 9/11 because Kevin Harrington drove the E-train, which went into the World Trade Center. And during 9/11, while the buildings were burning, he actually rescued people driving backwards on the train to get people out of the Trade Center area with his train.
And was he already converted to Sikhism at the
Yeah,
time?
he's been a Sikh for over 30 years.
Now, your district is a mosaic of every type of nationality. I mean, I see you at all these heritage and nationality events, at ethnic events at the Capitol.
Right.
I mean, you do have a lot of different nationalities in your district?
We have a very diverse district. We have a very large South Asian population. As I mentioned, we have the largest Sikh temple in Richmond Hill in my district. 9,000 members of that temple. They don't all walk to shul. They can drive, but it's a Sunday service. But 9,000 members. We also have the largest mosque in New York City, which is a Bangladeshi mosque at the Jamaica Muslim Center, right by Jamaica High School, and they have 6,000 members. And then, of course, we have a lot of Sephardic shuls and a lot of Ashkenaz shuls. So we have a multi-ethnic community. Most of the Muslim community in my district are of Bangladeshi descent, which was at one point part of India but broke off, and they're all here in Queens and living together and getting along with each other.
Do you have any Guyanese in your district?
We have a large Guyanese population, also in Richmond Hill.
The reason I ask is because the former mayor of Schenectady, Al Jasinski, went down to Queens to bring a lot of the Guyanese up. Now there's a large population in Schenectady, and he took them from Queens and also Guyana.
I actually marched in a parade with him.
Oh, okay.
In Richmond Hill. We have the Pagua Parade, which is celebrating, a festival of colors, the Holy Festival, and it's a heavily Guyanese tradition.
Oh, that's good. I'm glad we made that connection. That's good. Your committee assignments have changed from last year to this year. Well,
when I became chairman of corrections, I gave up a committee. I gave up election law, but I kept all the other committees.
Okay.
And I used to chair the task force on people with disabilities, and actually today is Disability Awareness Day.
Oh, wow.
And I did participate in the opening ceremonies we had this morning in the LOB.
Well, I'm honored you found time for us too, so thank you very much.
And we also have a couple of bills on the agenda today for the disability community that I'm still sponsoring.
Okay, well, we'll let you go.
I did take on a new assignment this year, though, on the Jewish side. I'm now co-president of the National Association of Jewish Legislators, which are
That's national, not New York.
national, not New York. I'm, active in the New York chapter that Chuck Levine chairs, but I'm actually co-president of the national chapter. And we meet at we get as many Jewish legislators from across the country together during National Conference of State Legislators conferences and regional conferences. We actually just had a board meeting phone call last night on the phone, and we're trying to do more Jewish outreach, getting more people, encouraging more Jews to run for office and to run for higher office. We've actually worked together on anti-BDS legislation in many states. I know there's some issues now occurring in Florida with separation of church and state issues about mandating prayer in schools, and that's an issue in Florida for many people in the Jewish community, and that the most of the prayers that they would be having would be Christian-based prayers. And we want to, make sure that people know that they have to be inclusive, that there are many different religions, and we can't, have religious prayers of one particular religion, in the schools.
And you Democrats and Republicans work together? I don't know how many Republicans.
Yeah, it was a bipartisan.
do it. Very
The
interesting.
National Association of Jewish Legislators is a bipartisan group. As I mentioned, it's a 50-state group, Democrat and Republican. My co-chair is a Democrat, but she's the only Democrat, only Jewish member of the Utah legislature. Patrice Rent is co-president with me, and she's in the Utah legislature. And the predominant religion in that legislature is Mormon, and they're very big supporters of Israel. So she has a real ally in the Mormon community, against the BDS movement, in favor of strong support for the state of Israel.
Well, also the Mormons during World War II rescued a lot of the documents, historic documents, birth certificates, death certificates. When you went on a ship, the manifests, and they have them underneath the tabernacle, and now they're scanning them in and they're digitizing a lot of that. But they were very much into ancestry, and I wouldn't be surprised if they started Ancestry.com. But anyway, that's a big connection with the Jewish community. And I did want to. Rabbi Simon's famous for saying that he is a prison chaplain, and you're head of corrections, chair of corrections. So
Right.
I think there's.
We have a private meeting together.
Rabbi Simon, where are you chaplain? Which
It's the
facility?
Albany hub, which is Green, Coxsackie, and Hudson, and then I go up to the Great Meadows, and McGregor was closed up. They're trying to consolidate, save money to say the least, but.
And they transferred the 16 and 17-year-olds to Hudson, in
Yeah.
a separate
Yeah,
unit, I
I've been
guess,
there
at
for a
Hudson.
while. Yeah, because they're youth offenders. That's the new idea behind that, and I'm almost say, thank God, everybody wants to gain members, like the new members, and I'm always looking, I say, thank God you're leaving, goodbye, have a good life. I try to tell them to have a good life, a decent, upright life. But, so thank God right now there's no youth offenders, 16, 17-year-olds that are there.
Oh, really?
There's no Jewish kids there.
Oh,
Yeah,
Jewish kids.
Jewish kids, I'm sorry. Jewish kids, this place is packed with everybody else.
So were you in favor of the raise the age?
Oh, absolutely,
Yeah.
yes. I was a strong supporter. It was obviously, went along with some of the reforms that we've been trying to do in the criminal justice system. As 16 and 17-year-olds, intellectually, minds are not fully developed. We've had medical testimony to that effect, that, the brain is still evolving at that age, and, it would not be fair to treat 16 and 17-year-olds, as adults in the criminal justice system. But just keep in mind, this was really all for non-violent felonies
Right.
and misdemeanors.
And it's
So-
phased in.
And it's phased in,
Right.
but so we're not talking about, mass murderers who happen to be 16 or 17. We're talking about, lower level nonviolent crimes, a lot of drug crimes and
So-
others at 16 and 17.
And where would they be put? Is it still Hudson, or is it
Well, they are
some
being
other-
putting in Hudson, but
Now,
they were
but-
talking about now being under the, youth department, under
Family court.
Children and Family
court.
Services.
Children and Family Services.
which used to be the Division for Youth.
Division for
Yeah,
Youth,
right.
correct.
So-
Say they would be under that jurisdiction.
Okay, so they wouldn't be.
It would be a separate facility for.
What about these kids,
the youth.
non-Jewish kids who are in Hudson, who are 16 and 17-year-olds? Are they going to be, again, transferred or?
They would probably be transferred if they're still 16 and 17. A lot of them may age out on their own, but
Yeah.
yeah, I would think that, or new kids coming in, in particular
New Kids on the
would go to
Block.
the new
The
facilities.
cell block. Okay. That's a
Over
group,
here, it's not
a
a
music group.
concentration.
New Kids on the Block. Okay.
Right.
And anti-BDS legislation, doesn't seem to be anything coming out of the assembly on
Well,
that, or-
the governor did a very strong executive order,
Resolution.
which had, executive order,
Yeah.
which had teeth, which actually prohibited New York State from doing business, with companies that supported the BDS movement. And that's, I think it's, the important thing would be the enforcement of that executive order,
But is
which has
that,
the weight of law.
okay, so there doesn't need to be anything going through the Assembly and the Senate?
There's no harm in doing it, but there is a very strong anti-BDS executive order in New York State, which is, for all practical purposes, the law of the land at this point.
Well, at this point, then, when this governor leaves eventually, then there's another governor that could do away with that. So, but if you have it in law, it's really highly unlikely that it would be repealed. And
Well,
that's why
yeah,
I was
we-
wondering.
We may revisit it, but with the executive order, there's less pressure to get it done, now.
Well, Dov Hikin's upset that there's no real legislation being debated.
Well, I would certainly support
Yeah.
legislation, but again, there are always, people raise, constitutional issues and what have you. So it's got to be,
So how does
Barnes
it get passed in the other states' legislatures? You mentioned that there's anti-BDS legislation.
Most of the
so-
legislation passed is more, symbolic and has less teeth than the executive order that the governor,
Okay.
put into place.
It's good for the people to know,
Yeah.
that that's the case,
Mark,
because-
I want to talk
Sure,
about
sure, go.
it because you have legislation that an adopted child should know their background. So I want you to talk about, but I also have incredible, heart-rending stories, because it's very nice to keep the parents not known, but on one birth certificate, and he showed me that, he was raised by his adopted parents who were Jewish, and it says his birth parents were Jewish. So I went to, bigger rabbis. I'm a local rabbi, and they said, well, we have to know who they are. We can't just go by some certificates they're Jewish. People just put down they're Jewish. So I went to people that contact that I know, and they just, no, it's absolutely not allowed. It says, I'll check it out. I don't even have to tell them. Absolutely not. You cannot. And, he's in flux because of that. But tell me your, situation is also.
Yeah, all birth certificates are sealed, when the adoption takes place. And the original birth certificate, which has the birth parents on it, is still being held at the Department of Health, but it's sealed, and no one can have access to it, including the adoptee themselves, or even the birth parents or the adopted parents don't have access to it as well. It's not just the adoptee that doesn't have access to it. So it seems, unjust, unfair in this day and age, especially when you have the internet, when anybody that really wants to try to find out who their birth parents are, if they have money, they can hire private detectives, they can use the internet, and they can find them. But it really seems unfair. It's almost like it's really a human rights issue. Why should somebody that happens to be adopted in New York State have less rights to having that piece of paper, which is their original birth certificate, as opposed to somebody that wasn't adopted? It doesn't seem fair, and the reasons behind it no longer really apply. Years ago, they adopted this in this state and many other states, and it's changing in quite a few states. I think there are probably about 15 or 16 states that have already allowed access to the original birth certificate. But the original reason was there was a stigma to giving up a child, for adoption. It was often unwed mothers, teenage mothers that gave up the children, and there was a certain shame involved in that. And they didn't want their name revealed, and that's why it was sealed to protect the birth parents. But I don't think that's really necessarily relevant anymore. I think it's human rights that, and also just the knowledge, just knowing for religious reasons who your parents are, what their religion were, and also for medical reasons.
Tay-Sachs.
To know what the medical history is. If someone who's adopted has a medical emergency and they have to go to an emergency room, the first question they'll ask you is, what's your medical history? Do you have any history of cancer? Do you have any history of heart disease? Do you have a history of strokes? And you have no way of knowing that if you don't know who your birth parents are.
Now, you had a story that you were telling us about that, that led to this? A brother and sister who were twins?
Well, it didn't lead to that. I just
Oh.
read about it in the media,
Yeah.
recently
yeah,
that occurred.
tell us
No,
this.
that there are situations where if you don't know who your birth parents are, and in this case it was a pair of twins that were adopted by two separate families and given different names, and they didn't know that there was a twin brother or sister, and they lived their separate lives, and ironically they ended up marrying. So obviously, and then they found out later that they were actually
Brother and sister.
Brother and sister.
That's just so amazing, out of all the people in this world, and that these two people who were twins get attracted to each other like that. I mean, it does show that twins do share a soul.
Right.
And
Or
that's,
brothers and sisters, any siblings, you would,
Yeah.
you like them,
that
you're
they're-
in the same
you know,
kind of
and
frame
all of
of
a
mind.
sudden, there's this appeal that you don't find amongst anyone else. I mean, there are twins who can finish each other's sentences.
Right.
So,
Well, I'm a father of twins. I have boy and girl twins.
oh, wow.
Yeah, they're both 25 now.
So, have you seen that with them? I mean, as they were growing up, that they really could, like one of them gets hurt, the other one feels it, or something like that?
They're
Or?
very close. They were very close growing up, and they're still very close.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Now, have you seen enthusiasm at Jewish functions around the Capitol change over the past couple of years? Have you seen it diminish at all or anything?
Not really. We had Rabbi Butman here earlier this year, celebrating Lubavitcher Rebbe's birthday, and we had a lot of members participating. And he actually, because of the day, we were still finalizing the budget, so there was some last-minute stuff, and it kind of delayed things a little bit. But we had a lot of members interested. We had a little luncheon before, but then he was on the rostrum. He gave the invocation. He had the pushka.
Uh-huh.
And members, Jewish and non-Jewish, kept coming over. They
Right.
were lining up to put money in the pushka to say hello. So I don't think so. I think it's still quite a few functions going on. And then when we had the
Tu B'Shvat.
Tu B'Shvat, but we also had the prince.
Oh yeah, Prince and Princess of Albania.
Albania.
Yeah,
And
from-
we had a Jewish community reception. A lot of people came to that kosher reception, talking about how the king of Albania, the current prince's grandfather, was very instrumental in saving Jews during the Holocaust.
Right.
And that's a part of history that not everybody knows about. And that was one of the things that we discussed. You were at that
Yeah.
ceremony. So
Had a great
I don't-
time, yeah.
I think we celebrate many different celebrations, different religions. We have a Haitian Day today, Haitian
Right.
Unity Day
Oh
today
no,
as
there's
well.
all this. I've learned about so many different cultures being at the Capitol, but we don't have any celebration. I mean, we've never had any celebration about anything, Jewish culture, not Jewish religion, but Jewish culture. And I found that I've always been, pestering people that why don't we, I think you do have a Israeli.
We did celebrate
dignitary
Israel
coming in.
Independence Day, Yom Ha'atzmaut, in the assembly just a couple of weeks ago, and we had the Consul General in New York, Dani Dayan, was here for that, and we had a little ceremony on the floor. We had a resolution. We introduced him on the floor.
I
He had a
gotta
whole
get on
delegation.
I got to get on that list of notifications.
So we did have that a couple of weeks, ago.
Okay,
And then we also had a luncheon for him
Alright.
in one of the rooms they had, before session.
Okay.
So every member was invited. So it wasn't just Jewish members. A lot of non-Jews came as
Sure,
well.
because a lot of non-Jewish members represent Jewish communities that used to be represented by Jewish legislators. So I just
in
wanted,
many cases, yeah.
yeah. So when you were in the city council, New York City Council, you were chair of finance.
Correct.
So you know all about writing budgets and doing the hearings, and it's just on the state level, it's a lot bigger.
Right.
The chairman of the Ways and Means Committee is retiring, Denny Farrell. The Ways and Means Committee is the budget writing
I think
committee.
he's not running for re-election next year. So he's still got a ways. He's still going to be in through 17 and through 18.
One more budget
and
cycle.
through 18, right?
Right. So you think he's going to be grooming someone to sit through that grueling, all those hearings and it's a grueling position.
Well, I've been on Ways and Means for a number of years.
Yeah.
It's certainly something that I enjoy. I enjoy the committee activity, attending the hearings, so I do actively participate. But, that's the speaker's decision, and there are a lot of senior members, I'm sure, that would be interested in that committee as well. So if I was offered it, I'd be happy to serve. I'd be thrilled. But again, there are a lot of members that are more senior than I am. I'm actually very happy to chair the Corrections Committee. It's a huge responsibility. We have 54 correctional institutions in New York State, as well as many, many local jails, including Rikers Island, which is the largest jail. I'm committed to holding hearings on the whole Rikers Island plan.
Do you favor closing it?
Well, not yet.
Not yet. You're listening.
I'm listening. I read the report. I'm still not convinced. The report basically required 5 separate jail facilities once the population is reduced almost in half. Right now, we're down to about 9,500 inmates at Rikers. The plan is once it's reduced to 5,000 inmates, which should take place over the next 10 years, that they would divide those 5,000 inmates among the 5 boroughs. And the idea would be to have them close to the court facilities, because Rikers, as you know, is only supposed to be for pretrial detainees and people that are waiting trial. So the idea would be to transport them to courts quickly. But the real problem, I think, is in the criminal justice system, is in the court parts, not having enough judges, not having enough court personnel, not moving the arraignments and court hearings through quicker. And there's no reason why somebody who has not been convicted of a crime should spend any more than a matter of weeks in detention. And in a lot of these minor cases, a lot of it is they can't make bail. There's a $5,000 bail or a $10,000 bail, and a lot of poor families can't afford it. Then I think the state should provide in those cases. Of course, we have the famous case of Caliph Browder, which got all the publicity. Which basically he was in Rikers for 2 years for stealing a backpack. Couldn't afford the bail. So he was in trial, and then he was acquitted after being in Rikers for 2 years, and then committed suicide. That's the case that is kind of the poster child for reform at Rikers. But a lot of it is not Rikers per se, as much as the whole court system and expediting trials and.
And you say the whole court system, so including upstate, because upstate there's an issue with the judges approving gun permits, pistol permits, and they're so busy with other cases and triaging that they don't get to these pistol permits very quickly, especially in Albany County. So that was another issue that maybe New York City doesn't have, but upstate.
But I've spoken to Senator Pat Gallivan from Buffalo, who chairs the Senate Committee on Corrections.
Right.
And he'd like to have hearings with me on the whole Rikers Island plan. So I think we'll hear from all the players, and I'm not convinced that closing Rikers is the answer, but it's certainly something that I would be open-minded to, and that should all come out in a public hearing.
One quick thing, are you sponsoring the bill for mayoral control of New York, the schools?
Not mayoral control of the schools. I do have a bill that the mayor has been pushing that's going to be on the floor in the next week or two, that passed out of 2 committees already, to have body scanners at Rikers.
No, not Rikers. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about mayoral control of schools.
I'm supporting it. I support it.
You support that?
Yeah, we don't. The Senate is the one that's trying to link it to charter schools. I think it should be 2 separate issues.
Okay.
I don't think it should be linked.
All right. And are you still into the cameras in the courtroom? Are you still pushing that?
I am. I don't know, certain years there was more momentum than other years. I know the chair of the Judiciary Committee is opposed to it, so she's against it, Lynn Weinstein.
So that goes that one. No wonder she won't come on the show in front of a camera. No, I'm just joking, Helene. No. And what is this bill that I see includes bias-related graffiti and hate crimes? Is that your bill?
Yeah, that's one of my bills. Basically it would be to treat swastikas and other bias-related graffitis, as hate crimes, not just as graffiti. And we all know, recent situations of, a rise in, swastika incidents, as well as, other hate speech. And, obviously that's something that we have to take seriously. It's not just, vandalism. It has dangerous consequences.
Okay. But we got a few more minutes?
Not a few more seconds.
Oh, okay. Is there anything that you wanted tell us about that we didn't know enough to ask you about?
Yeah, I
Sure.
touched on the body scanners. There's a bill that would allow the use at Rikers Island in particular, or other local jails, body scanners that could detect ceramic weapons that are being smuggled in now and causing a lot of slashing, in particular at Rikers, inmate on inmate as well as inmate on correction officers. And these body scanners, which were used by TSA, which emit low-level radiation, which are not dangerous because regular flight passengers took them, is prohibited under New York state law because you needed medical personnel to administer them. The legislation would allow correction officers to administer those body scanners with supervision, with training. And if this bill passes, which I'm hoping it will, it already passed in the Senate, I'm hoping it'll save a lot of violence and slashings at Rikers, whether they be inmate on inmate or inmate on correction
Well,
officer.
best of success to you with all of this.
All right, David, you're doing a great job, and we're always like to have your report card for every year, but keep up the good work and with good health.
Yes,
Thank you, Reverend
best
Simon.
of success.
Thank you,
absolutely.
Mark.